Welcome back to another episode, and today we're going through the second Iron Maiden album. That would be Killers, right here. You can see it on my shirt there. There's Eddie. Say hi. And so we went over the first Iron Maiden album in the first part of Iron Maiden-A-Thon video edition. But this is the second album. This is Killers. This was released in 1981. It came out on February 2nd. I'm looking at my notes here, if you can see me looking down. February 2nd in the UK and June 6th in the United States. And there is a little bit of a difference in the track listings. Once again, for the first album, there were some differences for this one. Actually, on the US release, there was an extra song added, and that was Twilight Zone, which fits in between the last two songs of the album. And the cover art here, which is one of the most iconic of all of Iron Maiden's cover arts, it's either this one or Number of the Beast. But this one was done by Derek Riggs, once again. And if you haven't seen this art, you haven't seen a person wearing a fucking heavy metal t-shirt or something like that, because it's iconic. It's been emulated, it's been redone, it's been parodied, everything. This is one of the most iconic images in heavy metal history. I'll just show you the back is the same. So we'll just put the little slipcase down. You know I love my slipcases. And here's what the CD looks like. There's the back. There's Iron Maiden. I'll get to my personal story about this album after we get through all of the other stuff that we have to do. So, something important that happened before the release of Killers and before the recording of Killers. On the first album, Dennis Stratton was the guitarist with Dave Murray. For the second album, after the recording of the first Iron Maiden album, Dennis Stratton was fired. He was fired because of a varying amount of reasons, but the main one being he went to the studio, and on the track Phantom of the Opera, which is one of Iron Maiden's most iconic ones, he tried adding like Bohemian Rhapsody style vocals to it. So he wanted to make Phantom of the Opera into Bohemian Rhapsody, basically. And that didn't fly. They saw music differently, and he got the axe. But they had to find a replacement, and luckily Adrian Smith was there to save the day. Adrian Smith was an Iron Maiden from Killers all the way to Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, and then of course as we go through later, he left the band and then rejoined with Bruce Dickinson for Brave New World and has been in the band ever since. Adrian Smith is one of the most popular guitar players in heavy metal. He's a really big fan favorite for Iron Maiden fans, and he's just all around amazing. So November 1980, Adrian Smith joins the band. The majority of the songs on the album were actually written before they recorded Iron Maiden, the first album. So go figure. And that happens a lot of the times with bands, like Guns N' Roses wrote a majority of Appetite for Destruction before they recorded it. But some of the tracks they recorded or they wrote in the session. No Murders in the Rue Morgue is one that they wrote while they were recording the album. And Steve Harris wrote every song, or has a hand in writing every song. The only songs that he didn't write solo were Killers, the title track, and Twilight Zone, which were written with help from Paul Di'Anno and Dave Murray. And we have a new producer for the album, the wonderful and sadly has passed away earlier last year in 2020, Martin Birch, the headmaster as they call him. He was the producer on this album, and he produced Iron Maiden albums up to, I want to say No Prayer for the Dying. I could be wrong on that. I'll have to look that up and put a little blurb or something up here to say how much of a dumbass I am. But also for this album, we have two instrumentals instead of the normal one that we get on a lot of Iron Maiden albums. We have two. We'll get to those when we get to the tracks. But yeah, Twilight Zone was not originally on the UK release of the album, but they put it on the US album release. And so that's all the background information that we have to get to. So let's get to a track-by-track look at Killers. So I will pull out the little booklet here, but let's show you what the album looks like on the inside here. on my face right here so you can see how dirty that is. But there's the album art on the CD. There's the Purgatory single art with Eddie merging with the devil. There's a bunch of great album art from this time period, but for like the singles and stuff, you can see some of them in the little book here that comes with the album. We'll go through, see somebody dressed as Eddie with the samurai sword. They have a very famous live show that they recorded, Made in Japan, or Made in Japan. And that t-shirt, the original one, is, you know, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But some people out there have like the ones that they've reproduced in the time in between. There's Dave Murray. There's Paul Di'Anno in his last appearance with the band. There's Clive Burr. The thunderous drumming. There's some of the crew. There's Mr. Adrian Smith right there. There's some more wonderful pictures of the Killers World Tour that they went on. There is the single art right there for Twilight Zone. And we're getting to the end here. There's a nice picture of all the band. And the last page, you can see all the crew and everybody that they have to thank. The long-suffering road crew. So yeah, and then there's the back with a nice image of Eddie right there. So let's put this back in here, and we will get to the track-by-track listing, which you can see below when I put the titles up when I'm editing this. So right off the start, we've got the Ides of March, which is an instrumental, so it doesn't actually follow a trend. I was going to say it follows a trend, but Iron Maiden, their first album, didn't really do that. So the Ides of March starts off, and I know Metal Allegiance likes to start off their concerts with it. It's a great instrumental. It's really short. It leads directly into Wrathchild, which is one of the greatest Iron Maiden songs, one of the greatest heavy metal songs of all time. If you don't like Wrathchild, now I might get some comments from some of my friends who like Iron Maiden also, and I say Wrathchild is a waste of a song when they play it live, because it is. It's 3 minutes long, and Bruce Dickinson doesn't really sing it as well as Paul Di'Anno does on the album. Wrathchild on the studio recording is perfection. It's great. It's fast. It's heavy. It's just, gets you going. It's a great song. If you haven't heard Wrathchild, what the fuck are you watching this video for, right? The third track is Murders in the Rue Morgue, which I said was written while they were recording the album. It is based on the Edgar Allan Poe poem of the same name, and it starts off slowly. You'd think that, well, if they didn't start off the album with the instrumental in Wrathchild, that they would have started off with that. When they played they did a tour in like 2003-ish, 2004-ish, where they only played stuff off of the first 4 Iron Maiden albums. And so they played, that was the opener for the show, with Murders in the Rue Morgue. And it starts off really slowly, and you're thinking, oh my god, it's another fucking ballad. And then Clive Burr's drums kick in, and your brain starts melting. It's one of my favorite Iron Maiden tracks. I remember I was listening to it when I was in like 9th or 10th grade, and I had my headphones in, and I was crossing the street. And thank God that I wasn't listening to it as loud, because I just started walking into the street, because the little sign had turned into the walk guy, and somebody turned the corner and was going a million miles an hour and almost fucking hit me with their car. Thank God that the people behind me started yelling, otherwise, and I turned around before continuing to walk, and the person flew by, and I didn't get hit by a car. So thanks to Murders in the Rue Morgue and the ladies behind me. But I love Murders in the Rue Morgue. It's one of my favorite tracks off this album. This album has a special place in my heart for Iron Maiden. I will get to that at the very end. I'm going to keep teasing it just for you. So we've got Another Life, which is another song that starts off with a kick-ass drum fill, drum beat, whatever. And it's for the written review that I did, which you can read in the description below. I'll link it, and I'll link all my reviews down there. I was really hard on this album when I wrote the written review. I think it was because it was early in Iron Maiden-A-Thon, and I think in the time between me writing that in 2019 and now, I've really grown on this album. I've grown on Paul Di'Anno as well. He's still a dickhead, of course, but I've grown on his singing, and I've grown on Iron Maiden's 2 albums with him a lot. And so Another Life was a song I was really hard on in the. I just said hard on. Well, I was really, yeah, okay, there you go. I was really hard on in the written reviews, and after listening to it a bunch of times, it's actually, I said in the review, it's not one of those songs that you're going to want to drive to. I kind of want to drive to it and drive really fast to that song. That's kind of a hallmark of this era, is that the songs are really driving, and they're really fast, and they're really aggressive, and I can see why there are those fans out there that, oh, Paul Di'Anno's Iron Maiden is the only Iron Maiden. Bruce Dickinson and Blaze Bayley are pussies or whatever. I've seen that a million times on Facebook. Those people aren't right, but I can see kind of where they come from, that this is a special era of Iron Maiden where they are fully entrenched into that new wave of British heavy metal sort of style. And you really hear it with Another Life, and I'm going on and on about this song, but it's a really good song. I really like it. I've really grown on it in the past, year and a half or so. Now, Genghis Khan is the second instrumental on the album, and it is not as good as an instrumental. I would say it is Iron Maiden's worst instrumental. They have a couple more after this, and then, but this Genghis Khan, it's kind of a throwaway track. It's not filler. Iron Maiden doesn't have a lot of filler songs. There are some bands out there that have filler on their tracks or on their albums, but Iron Maiden doesn't have that. Genghis Khan is one of them. So Innocent Exile. These 2 songs, I could do without them. It's just kind of like a weird song that doesn't really sound all that much like Iron Maiden. It's just it's the worst song on the album with lyrics, I think. The next song is the title track, and that's Killers. And if it wasn't for Purgatory on this album, Killers would be my favorite track off of it. It is Iron Maiden Perfection. It is a song about... It sort of bridges the gap between the 2 eras with the songwriting from Steve Harris and everybody, where it's about this urban, it's about a murderer, about a killer, that you learn is actually the narrator of the song, and you think at the beginning, oh my god, it's about like Jack the Ripper or something, and you learn that it's actually the narrator. And so the song bridges the gaps because it tells a full story. It's not based on anything, obviously, but it tells a full story over the course of the song, which a lot of Di'Anno songs don't actually do. It's all about, fucking, partying, drinking, going to the town. This song, however, is different, and it's one of my favorites in the Iron Maiden catalog. Bruce Dickinson sings it really well. He sings it really well on the Maiden England live release that they reissued a couple years ago. So if you want to listen to that, go listen to that. And the next song is Prodigal Son, which is the most un-Iron Maiden sounding song I've ever heard. It is a ballad. It sounds a lot like the Di'Anno material that would come after this album, which I will talk about also. But it's really slow throughout the whole thing. It has like a, I don't know a lot about music theory and structure, but it has a section in the middle where they do the guitar solos, and it slows down a little bit, and it gets moody. But the whole song is it's very weird. It's very strange. It doesn't sound like an Iron Maiden album or an Iron Maiden song. But, yeah, I don't really like it. It's Innocent Exile and it are the 2 weakest songs by far on this album. By far, like a country mile, whatever that means. And then there's Purgatory, which is my favorite song off the album. It's the most energetic. It's the most punchy song. If I hear the song Purgatory in the car and I get pulled over, I'm going to use that as my defense to whoever's giving me that speeding ticket. I'm sorry, officer, I was listening to Purgatory by Iron Maiden. They're going to have to get me off, because go listen to it. If you want to drive 100 miles an hour to that song, I don't know what the fuck is wrong with you, because there's obviously something wrong with you. It's a great song. It's the inside single art here. Twilight Zone, once, like I said before, was the track that they added to the US release. It's I can tell why they didn't have it on the UK release. It's kind of here or there. The lyrics are really cool. It's about like an apparition, which, Paul Di'Anno. And the single art is really cool. It's that picture of Eddie in the mirror with the lady. But it's not an amazing song. It's good. Drifter, the last song, is about a drifter. It has a guitar tone at the beginning that I have never heard, that I've never been able to replicate on an amplifier. the song itself is about somebody who just moves from place to place and plays music and leaves and joins a band and ends a band and all that. And it's eerily similar to the trajectory of Paul Di'Anno's career, especially after Iron Maiden. Uh, so I will segue that into Paul Di'Anno's firing. On the Killers World Tour, Paul Di'Anno himself will admit this, and everyone else in the band will admit this, that he was doing a lot of partying, he was doing a lot of drinking, he was doing, as he puts it, cocaine 24 hours a day. His performances were suffering, and if you just look at the trajectory of the band, they were going to be probably one of the better heavy metal bands of the era, but there wasn't that much of a ceiling that they had with Paul Di'Anno. And that's not a slight against Paul Di'Anno. Paul Di'Anno's a great singer, but there was just not that much of a ceiling to his voice, to his music, and everything after. And so Steve Harris and Rod Smallwood, the manager of the band, took it upon themselves and fired him at the conclusion of the Killers World Tour. They knew that they needed a new lead singer, and so they went on the search, a very short search, for a new lead singer, and we will get into that later, but if you know Iron Maiden, it's Bruce Dickinson. But just more about Paul Di'Anno and his career after. I had been very critical of Paul Di'Anno and his music, especially the music on this album. I'll stand by my criticism of this because while it's not as good as the albums that come after it, especially the next album, holy shit, the next album, but it is still a very landmark album in the history of Iron Maiden. It is a landmark album in the history of metal and the history of new wave of British heavy metal. It is a fantastic album that is just, not as good as the next couple albums, which isn't a slight against it, but I do think that Killers is inferior to the first album. It's got better production. Martin Birch is a wizard. Obviously, he made Heaven and Hell and a couple of other albums for Iron Maiden. But this album is still very good. It's a key part to the formula of Iron Maiden. Going forward with Paul Di'Anno, I've recently gotten a new appreciation for his singing and his solo work. So if you ever want to listen to some more Paul Di'Anno that sounds sort of similar to this, but a little more poppy, you can listen to his 1984 album Di'Anno, which is a wonderful, wonderful album that I have just recently gotten into and just listening to death in lockdown here. And his other work with Battlezone is really good. His other work with he did two albums with Dennis Stratton after this. I believe they're called he did an album called The First Iron Man, which is kind of a stupid name, but I guess it's a play on Iron Maiden. But that album is also fantastic. The two albums he did with Dennis Stratton are both good. I've gotten a newfound appreciation for his music and for his voice. His voice is a lot better than I thought it could be, especially after these albums where it sounds more of like a punk singer and it sounds like, oh, he's going to blow out his voice and he can sing. The man can sing. So check those albums out if you want more stuff that sounds like this. As for my personal story with the Killers album here, when I went and saw Iron Maiden for the first time, I had no fucking clue anything about them outside of The Number of the Beast, the song, Run to the Hills, and The Trooper. I went and saw them and my life was changed forever. I was immediately a fan. I took my birthday money because it was right around my birthday, and I went to Amoeba Music and I just grabbed every Iron Maiden album that I could. I spent about, $200 or something on a bunch of albums new with this beautiful slipcase, and bought all the albums I could, and it just so happens that Killers was the first album that I popped into my Dell laptop to burn on to then put onto my iPod. I said my iPod, not my iPhone, my iPod. That's how old this is. And I hit play, and I was like, okay, cool, this first song sounds pretty nice, sounds pretty rockin', and then I was like, this doesn't sound like the guy that I just saw. This sounds like a different... I was looking at the back, and I was like, it says Iron Maiden on the front. Did I get a cover album? Did I get somebody with the same name? Did they make a mistake? And I've seen this album art before. And it turns out I was just a dummy, and I didn't know that Iron Maiden had a singer before Bruce Dickinson at that point. Or a singer after Bruce Dickinson. But yeah, so I didn't know what it was, and so for a long time I just left Killers and the first album by itself. I just didn't listen to it for like months, and then finally I was like, you know what, I'll just give it a fucking try. Like that happens a lot with me and Iron Maiden or other stuff. I'll get obsessed with something, I'll just get latched onto it, and then afterward I'll be like, yeah, you know, I should try that other thing. It happens with video games. It happened with Iron Maiden, and so then I finally gave it a shot, and I loved it. And so yeah, that's a little bit of a personal story about me and Killers that you can make fun of me for, because I think I actually owned a Killers shirt before I had really listened to the album. That tells you something. But yeah, that's my personal story with Iron Maiden. As for going forward, this sort of style by Iron Maiden was with the new lead singer Bruce Dickinson was sort of thrown by the wayside for a more complete heavy metal sound. So you don't hear the punk stylings anymore, and you get the real twin guitar power of Smith and Murray, and the songwriting is just better, and the vocals are better. Bruce Dickinson is a god, so you know it's not a slight against Paul Di'Anno's voice. To conclude this, I guess, Killers has its place in the pantheon of Iron Maiden, but in my opinion, it is not one of their better albums. That sounds like it's a negative, but almost all their albums are really good. So it's probably their third or fourth worst album, in my opinion. But the albums ahead of it are all perfection, and the albums below them would be really good albums for other bands. So go figure. Killers is a piece of history, and I love it. I love all things Iron Maiden. And so I guess that's going to do it for today. Tune in whenever I record the album review for Iron Maiden-A-Thon video edition for The Number of the Beast, which is coming up. So that'll do it from me to you for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again.